Hey folks, today I'm going to give you all the details on the new TravlFi 5G router. Now, if you're not familiar with TravlFi, the main selling point is that you get access to the same cell towers that all three of the big carriers, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T use. You get access to those same cell towers, yet you don't have to have a data plan individually with each one of the three carriers. Instead, TravlFi takes care of all that behind the scenes. And so whether you're camping or traveling, no matter where you are, it's going to connect to the strongest cell tower. And again, it's done seamlessly, all behind the scenes for you. And this is super useful to RVers, especially if you're traveling in different areas. I mean, let's just say one week you're camping in an area where Verizon cell towers are the strongest. And so then the TravlFi router connects to the Verizon tower. But let's say the next week you're camping somewhere completely different and there's no Verizon service, but there happens to be a T-Mobile tower in the area. Well, then the TravlFi router is going to connect to T-Mobile. Now, about a year ago, I actually did a video on the JourneyXTR showcasing how it performs in real-world environments. And out of that video, one of the most common comments was, hey, I really like the JourneyXTR, but it's only 4G. And so people were asking, hey, when are we going to get a TravlFi router that has 5G support, right? Well, here we are about a year later, and TravlFi has delivered. Basically, this is the same concept as the previous JourneyXTR, only it has the 5G support, so it's much more powerful. And I think that's really neat that really over the course of a year, the TravlFi team took that feedback and then got this product released to market. By the way, I will include links to purchase this product below, so I appreciate you using those to help support the channel. Now, TravlFi sent me this new 5G router to test, and so I've been using it for the last several weeks. Everything from more remote locations where the cell reception is weaker to more populated areas where there's a real solid, strong 5G connection. And so I'm going to share those results here in just a moment, but to get started, let's do a quick unboxing. This is the box that it comes in. Sorry, there's an old shipping label on top there, but if you want to pause and read the features that are on it, feel free to do so. Some different views of it there. All right, so up top, we've got some documentation from TravlFi, nice little QR code there. And we also have a mounting diagram if you want to mount it on the wall. And then we've got a kind of a quick start user guide right here. But let's take a look at the actual hardware itself there. So here's what it looks like. We'll start on the front there. It's got some LED lights. Then right here, it looks like we've got where the SIM cards are installed. We've got a reset button. And then all these gold posts are going to be for the antennas. On the back, we've got a simple on-off switch. We've got our DC input, our power input, and then we've got a WAN/LAN 1 and a LAN 2 port along with a USB-C, and that is about it. So let's take a look at the antenna here. Okay, so I got all 6 of the antennas installed. You don't want to use a wrench to tighten these, just make sure they are finger tight so that we get a good connection on the antennas there. And so that's what it looks like there with all the antennas installed. We also get in the box the AC adapter here, and for those curious, this is a 12-volt power supply, 3 amps, so 36 watts. So that's nice because in an RV, if you wanted to forego the AC adapter and wire it directly into your 12-volt system, of course you'd want to use a fuse, you could easily do that since it is 12-volt. And then we have a basic Ethernet cable here and some mounting hardware. So like I said, I've been testing this device for several weeks now across various locations. Some of them had weaker reception, and then some of them had stronger 5G reception. And so let me cut to those speed test results next, because at the end of the day, if this device doesn't deliver fast and reliable internet, then why bother with it, right? So first I'm going to showcase some of the best results that I got, because after all, if you're watching this, you probably want to know just how fast is the new TravlFi 5G router, right? And so this first speed test I'll show you is from downtown Chattanooga. And I was actually passing through for a quick pit stop to get some work done. And Chattanooga, it's not the most densely populated city, but it is fairly populated, and it had 5G coverage. And so check this out. This is the download portion of the speed. And look at that. I mean, it's going up into the 150s, 160, and it's going to finish out at 168 megabits per second. I mean, that is a very respectable download speed. And then you can see on the upload in there, it's hovering in the 15s. And I think we're going to finish out on this one in the 20s, if I recall. Yeah, 20.12 megabits per second. Very respectable upload speed. And you know, Chattanooga, there probably was the potential to have some congestion on some of the cell towers there because it is a more populated area compared to being out in the country. And yet it's still got a very respectable 168 megabits per second on the download speed. And I mean, really, that rivals some home internet speeds that are wired through cable, right? And so the fact that that was all wireless, done through the TravlFi 5G router, really impressive. But then check this next one out. Later the same day, I was making my way back home, driving through the North Georgia mountains, and I pulled off the interstate for another pit stop, ran a speed test. This one was in a city that was more remote, or at least less densely populated, but it had a really good 5G signal. And check this out. I mean, we are well over 200 megabits per second on this test, and it's going to finish up at 204.8 megabits per second. Really impressive. And then I'll let you look at the upload speed as well. Of course, the upload speeds, they're always going to be significantly slower than the download speeds, and that's just how it is. But even so, this one finishes out at 24.5 megabits per second upload. Very impressive. I mean, all this is going through the new TravlFi 5G router. That is more than enough bandwidth for an entire family. And we're talking about, you know, streaming, video conferencing, all the things that consume a lot of bandwidth. And to get over 200 megabits per second, very impressive. Now, for my next test, you've probably noticed that so far, Verizon has been the preferred carrier that the router has connected to. And I think that's in part because arguably Verizon probably has the most built out 4G, 5G network out there, right? But also the areas that I've been traveling in lately and testing the router in have been more dominant with Verizon coverage. So what about another carrier, T-Mobile, for instance, right? Well, I found a spot right here that has a very strong T-Mobile signal. And so, guys, check this out. You're going to want to see this. On this speed test here that I'm running, and this is in real time, by the way, for the video here, look at this. Over 500 megabits per second. I mean, this is even better than a minute ago before I ran it off video. This is just absolutely incredible. So we're connected through T-Mobile here, and look at that, 687 megabits per second. I mean, that is true 5G speeds, what we'd expect. Of course, the upload, it's a little bit slower, which, you know, we've come to expect. Uploads are always going to be slower, but even the upload speed finishing out at 6.12 megabits per second. So I think that's really neat because, again, this was through T-Mobile. I didn't have to set up a separate data plan with T-Mobile versus Verizon. All that's done behind the scenes with TravlFi. And by the way, you can force the router to connect to another carrier like I just did for this test here. So those were some of the best results that I got, and I think it really showcases the potential, the incredible speed that you can get out of the new TravlFi 5G router. But what if you're in an area that has weaker cell reception to begin with, no 5G service perhaps, it's just 4G? How does the new TravlFi 5G router work in those environments, right? Well, I spend a lot of time camping at state parks, and if you're an RVer, then you already know that oftentimes at state parks, the cell reception is spotty at best, right? And so I was camping out at Cloudland Canyon State Park, Northwest Georgia, up in the mountains, fairly remote there. I got to my campsite, and I have service on my phone through AT&T, and it was 1 bar, sometimes 0 bars, but I got my campsite all set up. And then I was really impressed because I didn't change any settings or do anything on the new 5G router here, but it had automatically connected to the internet. So I started running some speed tests here that I'll show you. And again, this is a fairly remote area. It doesn't have 5G coverage, but I wanted you to see how it performs when it connects to 4G service. And so you can see that it connected to Verizon. That was the strongest cell tower in this area. It was still a very weak signal. But check this out, it's actually pulling in a signal. You're looking at the download speed right here first. And I was really pleased because, again, I didn't go in and change any settings on here whatsoever. It just automatically connected. And I mean, sure, this is a 4G speed clearly, but 37.82 megabits per second. You know, for a remote area, a remote campsite like that, I think that's more than doable for the average person, especially with that download speed at 37 megabits per second. That's more than enough for internet, email, even some basic streaming. And that upload speed, yeah, it was slower, but that only comes into play if you're backing up to the cloud or trying to upload pictures and files somewhere. So very respectable in the end, especially for a 4G speed. But let me do one more test, and this one I'm going to do live in real time for the video on my property here. And I'm just going to tell you that the reception from all three of the carriers is very poor and weak here. My phone is through AT&T, and typically I'll have 1 bar, sometimes 0 bars. And so very poor reception. I think this will demonstrate kind of a worst case scenario for the 5G router. You know, how is it going to perform in a worst case scenario where the signal is very weak? And so let's go ahead and do a live test here for the video. You can see that the device connected to Verizon. And by the way, guys, this is all automatic. I didn't go in here and adjust any settings. I just plugged it in and it pulled up the strongest signal. But you can see there 29 megabits per second. Looks like it's going to finish out at 28.73. That's very respectable. Again, considering how weak the reception is here on my property. And let's see what the upload speed does as well. This is, of course, going to be significantly slower than the download like we've seen before. But still, I mean, this is pretty good. 1.78 megabits per second, considering, you know, that I've got 1 bar of service typically with all the carriers here on the property. And like I said earlier in the video, because the router has these external antennas, it's able to pull in a stronger signal compared to using my phone as a hotspot. And so really what I wanted to demonstrate in that last test is that even if you're in a very remote location where the cell reception is very weak, you're typically going to get a stronger signal using the router because it has those antennas. And sure, those speeds weren't anything to brag about, especially by 5G standards, but hey, at least I've got an internet connection and that it's stable and reliable. And that brings me to an important point to discuss, and that is the TravlFi 5G router. It relies on the cell towers provided by the major carriers to provide the internet. And so TravlFi is not miraculously able to produce an internet connection if you're in an area where there's 0 cell service. I mean, if you're out in the desert and there's no cell towers nearby, right, it's not going to be able to miraculously produce internet. So you got to have at least some cell reception, even if it is very weak like that last test. But then another variable that you've got to consider is, let's just say that you're traveling in an area that's got great 5G coverage, right? I mean, maybe you're parked right next to the cell tower, you've got full bars, but it's a very highly populated area. I mean, take the extreme example of being at a stadium where there's perhaps thousands of people connected to that same tower, and the signal strength is really good, but because there's so many people connected to it, the backbone, the internet that's going to that tower, becomes the bottleneck. And so you may have a really strong signal, but the speed is not quite living up to that 5G speed. It's not the fault of TravlFi necessarily, but it could be that that tower it's connecting to is at capacity. And you know, I've noticed that sometimes I'm in areas that are advertised as having complete 5G coverage, but then the speeds that I'm getting on my phone don't quite live up to that 5G hype, right? And I mean, I think carriers use that 5G language very loosely, and they kind of boast about their networks having the best 5G speeds, but in the real world, oftentimes we don't actually get those 5G speeds. I mean, 5G speeds are supposed to be in excess of 1,000 megabits per second, but the few times that I've run tests on my phone where I've had full 5G coverage, I've never gotten anywhere close to that. I think maybe 500 was the best that I've ever noted personally. And so I say all that because TravlFi, just like any other MVNO, they are subject to the carrier's cell towers. And if the speed going to that cell tower is, you know, at its capacity, you're only going to get so much using the 5G router. So just because you buy a 5G router doesn't mean that you're always going to connect to 5G networks. But the beauty here on the TravlFi router is that it's going to fall back to 4G when the 5G network is not available. And actually the modem inside of here for the 4G, it's a category 19 modem. And so it's much faster than the 4G modem that's in the previous JourneyXTR. And so obviously some of those tests that you saw there were 4G tests, and that just goes to show that when that 5G is not available, it's going to fall back to the 4G, and that 4G is still more than adequate for most of us, especially when you're in a pinch. But in the remainder of the video, let me share some of the features that I really like about the new TravlFi 5G router, and then I'll circle back at the end of the video and share who I would recommend this for. So first, let me talk about the hardware on the new TravlFi 5G router. One thing that really impressed me is as I traveled about and I'd get to a pit stop, for a break or my campsite, the router consistently was connected to the strongest cell tower. I didn't have to go in and power cycle it or reset it or start fidgeting with the settings. It just automatically connected, stayed connected. It seemed very reliable. And so in terms of being user-friendly and just doing what it's supposed to do, I was really impressed by how it performed over the last few weeks. Second, and this is probably one of my favorite features on the new 5G hardware here, and it's these simple LEDs across the front. And you might be thinking, well, why is that such a big deal, right? Because don't most routers have LEDs? And yes, they do, but they really thought out these LEDs, and some of them actually change colors to indicate different things. I'm going to hold up the legend right here, and if you want to pause the video, you can. But I find the second and third LEDs very helpful here. The second indicates the cellular signal. So if it's red, there's no connection to the network whatsoever. If it's blue, there's a 4G signal. And if it's green, there's a 5G signal. Then the third one over shows the signal strength. So if it's off, there's no signal. If it's red, it's 1 or 2 bars, and that's what I'm at right now. I'm on red. Then if it's blue, there's 3 bars, and then green, it means 4 bars or full coverage. And so I like this because without me going into the router settings or some kind of app on my phone, I can real quickly look at the router visually and see exactly what's going on. Am I connected to a cell network at all? Is it 4G? Is it 5G? How many bars do I have? What's the signal strength? And then of course it's got the basic ones like the power, the Wi-Fi light, the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So it's really well thought out, but I just like it because it's simple and I can real quickly look at the router, see the lights, and understand exactly what's going on. But then third, I really like the data plans themselves that are offered by TravlFi. And oftentimes the MVNOs, the mobile virtual network operators, there's a bunch of them out there obviously, but oftentimes the MVNOs, their data plans for routers and things like this are priced very high, not very affordable. And one thing I've always appreciated about TravlFi, even going back to their JourneyXTR, is they price out their plans very affordably. I think you're getting a lot of value. And at the risk of dating this video, I'm not going to talk about the specific plans on the 5G router that you can get today. I will include links below to those plans if you're curious, but sometimes that can change over time. But in my opinion, the 5G data plans that they have, they're very comparable to what you'd spend on home internet, right? Hardwired plans, whether you've got fiber or cable at home, and yet you're getting similar speeds in some cases through TravlFi, and it's completely wireless. I mean, you're free to roam the country and you get that great internet wherever you go. Which brings me to my last and final point of the video, and that is who would I recommend the new TravlFi 5G router to? And as an RVer, I can especially see this being useful for RVers that spend an extended amount of time, traveling in their RV. Or maybe you're even living full-time in your RV, you're traveling about the country, you've got a job perhaps that requires the internet, and not just internet, but faster speeds, right? Where you need that 100 to 200 megabits per second for video conferencing and streaming multiple things at the same time, right? And I think that's really where this new 5G router really shines. It's going to be more affordable than your satellite internet. You don't have to have a clear view of the sky. You don't need to set up a dish in the rain outside your RV every time you go to a campsite. You just put it in your RV. There's no external antennas or setup installation required. It's just very simple. And yet you're going to get those 5G speeds, maxing out around 200 megabits per second. So I definitely recommend the new 5G model to folks looking for those premium 5G speeds, folks that don't want data caps or penalties for consuming large amounts of data, And I think especially for folks that are using it more on a long-term basis, I think that's where the TravlFi 5G plans really shine. And by the way, there's no contract. They're month-to-month plans. And so you could use it for a month and then not use it for several months. It's very flexible. Now, on that note, let me just point out that if you're trying to decide between the new 5G router and the previous JourneyXTR, which is 4G, let me just point out that you cannot get a 4G data plan and use it with the 5G router. And so look at those different data plans first, the 4G versus the 5G. And with the 4G, there's some more economical data plans with smaller pools of data that may be more helpful to you. And so, I mentioned that because if you're a weekend warrior like myself, and maybe you use the RV over the course of a weekend here and there, you're not using it for the entire month, it may seem a little bit pricey to subscribe to one of the 5G data plans because, they're good for a month. It's unlimited data. That may seem a little pricey though, especially if you're just using the RV for a weekend here and there and you only need maybe a few days or about a week of data. And so I think that's where it probably makes more sense for you to stick with the JourneyXTR. And I mean, this is a great product still. I've used this for over a year and I really like it a lot. It has been a lifesaver in so many different situations. So it really just depends your style of camping and your data needs. But if you really don't need that fast, unlimited data that you're going to get with the 5G plans, then I think it might make more sense for you to look at that JourneyXTR. And it is, like I said, a really solid piece of equipment. It's not going to be obsolete anytime soon. And so hopefully that'll help you decide between the 5G router and the 4G JourneyXTR. So in summary, I've been very impressed with the new TravlFi 5G router so far. In fact, really, if I had to summarize, they've basically taken all the features that I came to really appreciate out of the JourneyXTR and basically carried those forward into this new 5G router. And so it has all those features that we've come to appreciate and enjoy. And so I'm really looking forward to testing this and using it some more. Now, if I left out any details or you have any questions that I can help answer on the 5G router, definitely drop me a comment below. Like I mentioned, I will include links to purchase this router below, so I appreciate you using those to help support the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.